some of the politicians in this world who are supporting Israel.
وَلَنْ تَرْضَ عَنْكَ الْيَهُودُ وَلَا النَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُمْ. That the Jews and Christians will never be happy with you until they take you away from your own deen.
Names such as Anjum Mir has no authority, okay, as a scholar, no respect in the Muslim world.
In America, they put these people in Guantanamo Bay
on top of a
and they interrogate them and they do a good job. What do we do in England?
So our young people aren't sure how to be a part of the society and what the relationship should be between them and non-Muslims.
People like the boys like Siddiq, who blew himself up in the tube on 7/7 bombing, the youth will still have the enabling environment to be radicalized.
Allahu Akbar!
تاج أمتنا على هاماتها هيا سرايا دولتي هيا عيدي مجدنا حيا وجي تاج أمتنا على هاماتها هيا أبيدي كل طاغوت وأولينا وجيشيا.
George Bush and Tony Blair were in some ways the most Christian of leaders we've had, and yet they started a totally inappropriate war in Iraq, as if that was going to solve the problems of 9/11. But there was no connection between those who caused the planes to fly into the World Trade Center. There was no connection with Iraq, because Iraq under Saddam Hussein was bitterly opposed to all of that. It was a depressive regime, yes, but it was miles and miles away from allowing those sorts of expressions of Islam to have any toehold in Iraq. And of course, since then, it's this kind of caliphate Islam has begun to show its face in Iraq.
إلى إعلان الخلافة وتنصيب إمام وهذا واجب على المسلمين واجب قد ضيع لقرون.
Most Muslims out there, a lot of them are very confused. Who is this person, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi? Where has he come from? Who is behind him? Is it legitimate? Does it have any substance to it? So there's a lot of confusion which is out there. And because of that confusion, some Muslims who are, we could say, very idealistic and are very disaffected are actually attracted to this notion, because they say, oh, now we have finally got a Khalifa.
They declare anyone who does not accept them as the Khilafah and Abu Bakr as the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of all of the Muslims. If you do not accept this, do not give your allegiance to us, you have given your allegiance to everyone else, to Dar al-Harb, to Dar al-Kufr, to the land of the disbelievers, to the war and terror, to America, to US, etc., etc. This is the simple black and white view of the world that they are presenting to a disaffected mindset.
The idea that the world is divided into the world of Islam versus the world of the disbelievers, but they ignore history following on from that, which said actually Muslim scholars said the world is not as binary as that. Actually Islam is the abode of Islam is wherever you can practice Islam freely, but you find that Muslims, the ISIS, ignore all of that kind of history, and they have a very perverse view of the world, and so that kind of understanding has to be challenged.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
There's no march today. We'll have a peaceful demonstration. Register our anger. Just devastating what's going on and the impact on the civilians. They're losing their lives.
What's going on isn't right and it needs to be stopped. It's really unfair and unjust and someone needs to do something about it.
Lots of young people have a frustration with what they see as a level of inequity and unfairness, particularly around the Palestinian-Israel issue, or it might be the Kashmir issue. Those tend to be the big ones. Equally, I think if you ask them, and I'm second guessing here in terms of where would they like to reside and build their futures, the vast majority would say here in Britain. And they're sensible young people. I think sometimes we tend to maybe be dismissive of young people and their ability to articulate their own views and expressions and just where they are in life.
Problem is, and I've met many Palestinians, they are downtrodden, they are poor, they are ignored, and they're ignored by their own leaders as well as the leaders of the Muslim and Arab world and of course the Israelis. So they're the victims they're everybody's victims.
There's no one single reason why a person is going to go and join ISIS or commit extremist activities. You find there's a multitude of different reasons, and I'd say some of that's personal, some of it's political, and some of it's religious, and it combines in a different manner for different people.
Like ISIS, they prey on people's naivety and vulnerability, because when people are vulnerable and naive, they're at their weakest, and that's when you target them and you can influence them to get involved in all sorts.
People feel angry, people feel alienated, people don't understand why something like this would happen, right? Why would someone come up to someone and say, just because they're wearing a hijab, it's like, oh, go back, ISIS, I don't want you to behead me, go back to your own country. People don't understand, why someone would say that, because Muslims in the UK have been around for a long time.
This is a Muslim area and you're not wanted around here. You can't say, I respect your faith, respect your belief, and then be in our area whoring yourself out. No, it doesn't work like that. You can't be in an area seeing a young girl, stop, you can't be in an area seeing a young girl, schoolgirls being approached by a curb call, say that it hurts you.
Against the prostitution in this area. Went down. Please support the campaign.
Well, what we find is that, they fall into different groups, but a lot of the people, and they are mainly young people, first thing we can recognize them is they have very little Islamic knowledge. And they have a very poor link with Islamic scholars. Partly it's because Islamic scholars are not reaching out to the young people and teaching them and instructing them correctly in these Islamic principles. So many of them don't have Islamic knowledge. Many of them are very socially excluded. They don't feel they fit into British society. They've had experiences of Islamophobia, discrimination, unable to get a job. These are all push factors.
You can't have a blanket kind of approach towards how you view Islamic faith schools. A lot of them are actually very good, and a lot of them produce very good British citizens who take part in British activities and integrate. Just as the same, I'm sure, Jewish faith schools would do and Christian faith schools would do. But there is actually some truth in what they say. In some of the schools, they do tend towards a bit of fundamentalism, and, that does happen. That is a problem that we as Muslims need to address and, fix. That's definitely something that I do think exists. So hiding it under the carpet isn't going to fix the problem. But yes, it's true that painting us all with the same brush, that's not the right way to engage us to fix ourselves.
When the Trojan horse news came out, it was said that there was an Islamic plot to take over the schools. And Ofsted reports and other investigations that have taken place, they have not seen any sign of that kind of takeover and Islamic plot. What we have seen is that some governors try to influence the staff or try to lead their schools in a particular direction. Now, there might be shortcomings, there might be issues, but we need to deal with those issues in an amicable manner. What we see here is that actually a hedge slammer has been used to crack a nut. It's the way and the methodology that's been used that has actually portrayed the British Muslims in a very negative light.
The problem is the identity crisis that they face on a daily basis. When they step outside their house, they're considered to be aliens, and they're asked where they're from. When they say they're from Leeds, they ask them where in Leeds you're from, well, you know, and then when they tell them they're from Beeston, then they say, where are you from? So what they actually mean when they're asking these kids is actually their background. But it's quite a funny thing in a way that when they go back to Pakistan, they're not considered as Pakistanis or Bangladesh or elsewhere. They're considered to be British. Yet in their own country, in Britain, they're not considered to be British.
In terms of how identity affects my way of life as a Muslim, as an activist, as a person involved in campaigns, it affects my way of life in the sense that for me, Muslims are demonized and in the media of your government and policies and so on. And so because, I mean, I have a baby, but I identify me as a Muslim. Obviously, I pray, I identify myself with the faith, I believe in the Quran and the rest of it. And just holding those beliefs kind of affects me because I'm treated in a different sort of way in the media. Whereas if I wasn't a Muslim, then I wouldn't have certain labels attached to me. I wouldn't have certain derogatory statements attached to my background because I'm a Pakistani, certain terms that identify with Pakistanis.
Living in Britain or just anything, so it's like, do you feel like you have to compromise your identity or your religion based on British values or things like that? So for example, let's say you're going out for a work do and they go to a pub, do you feel like you have to be strong and say no, I don't want to do that, or would you directly explain to somebody why you can't do something, or would you be comfortable in that environment?
Yeah, I think I'm quite comfortable. Yeah, I'd be able to explain. Yeah. If I didn't, I'd just say straight no.
Yeah.
The extent to which this has happened is the alarming part. I mean, particularly in a country like ours, where the values we hold dear. You would think that people who've come here and born here, go to school here, would imbibe the sort of those values.
British value, it depends on this, because I'm mixing traditions with values. Okay. So for example, if we say that an example of an average British person, say on Friday night, they might go out drinking, partying, then come back Saturday 5 o'clock in the morning home. Yeah. So I don't know what that's a tradition more than a value.
Yeah. Can't be a value, right?
Can't be a value. That's not a value. That
I can say with 100% confidence that I'm sure all of us will agree that as British Pakistanis, we are more than happy with those British values. We are happy with the notion of the rule of law.
الحمد لله الذي مكننا ويمكننا كل يوم من هؤلاء الرؤوس المرتدة.
Radical groups are operating like brands, like what you call transnational, businesses, and they are attracted to a particular brand which seems to be in ascendancy. So IS suddenly comes out of nowhere, is now the leading brand in this particular area as opposed to Al-Qaeda, and therefore people want to attract it. People don't want to be associated with losers, they want to be associated with winners. And so there is a kind of a pull which allows disaffected young people who feel a certain degree of romanticism and a degree of adventure, and feel attracted by the way that electronic media is used to present these particular groups. And they are deliberately presented in a very romantic way. And so young people suddenly go out there and then they suddenly realize this is a lot more serious than they thought it was.
الحمد لله الذي من علينا ببيعة الخليفة وجعلنا من جند الخلافة ووفقنا للتدريب والإعداد تحت راية دولة الإسلام فلك الحمد ربي أولا وآخرا وإلى أميرنا أمير المؤمنين.
ISIS are actually hijacking this as an issue. And ISIS are also to blame because through ISIS they are perpetuating the violence. Because ISIS Okay, but through the creation of ISIS, this creates militarism. This reinforces what we call the military-industrial complex, multi-billion-pound industry, because one feeds off the other. So ISIS creates militarism, militarism creates more terrorism, and we create this cycle. And that's why we shouldn't really be supporting either of these. We don't agree with the war on terror and Western foreign policy, which is causing the destruction of the Muslim world. We also don't agree with ISIS, who as a result of this are reinforcing and creating even more instability in Muslim countries.
In today's Pakistan and Afghanistan, I know parents, and I personally know, I've interviewed those families who sent a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old to become a suicide bomber, volunteered. It's freaky, it's frightening, but it's there. So I think instead of reflecting on it from a moral or a historical angle, we need to, as academicians, also confront the reality through research. Why is it happening?
Pakistani youth, of course, are getting radicalized even today. The net result, the enabling environment for people to get to extreme right of the center ideas is still available. The youth of UK, when they go back to their homeland, I'm talking of the Pakistani natives, they could still get ideas of the extreme right, which is, and what is extreme right? The Deobandi Wahhabi axis. Unfortunately, who created this? This was created by the Pakistani government at the behest of the West in general, but America in particular during Cito-Cento, but especially during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. When the West, including UK and the Americans, they said, please prepare a force of Mujahideen or help prepare, in which the army got involved, the state got involved, and they created the Mujahideen. Mujahideen today, unfortunately, have morphed or mutated into the Taliban.
The only people responsible for radicalisation are the people that do the radicalising. This is not the fault of any, I wouldn't blame it on the Tories either. It's not the fault of any political party. It is the fault of disillusion with society. It is the fault of alienation. It is sometimes the fault of people being sidelined, people being pushed to the fringes and feeling that they've no option or nothing to lose. But I think that applies far more to the dispossessed.
They have never been to Istanbul before, yet this journey has come to mean everything to the anguished families of the 3 missing girls. Most were strangers before the youngsters boarded a flight during half-term week. Now their families have come to Turkey to see what they saw, to understand and to explain.
What ISIS are trying to do is very much target girls. It's fundamental to their belief. They want women and girls to come over to ISIS and help build this so-called state of theirs. That's what they've said in their publications. So that's what they're doing. They have a very aggressive media campaign. They actually have a media foundation called Al-Zohra, which is aimed specifically at women and girls. And unlike previous terrorist organisations who tried to get women to be attracted to their cause, ISIS have managed to do that very successfully. And some of it's very similar to young men. They target men in a similar way through social media, through glossy films. And a lot of these young girls, they completely buy into that ideological view. They buy into the ISIS narratives.
The guys posing in their guns, and looking like kind of models and this and that. And so, unfortunately, our sisters, they get taken in by it. They think these guys are there waiting for them. Unfortunately, when they end up there, the guys ain't that good looking. It's part of the problem, and their marriages ain't that exciting either. But unfortunately, again, it's just this idealistic, naive mindset that has this utopian view that this is a perfect place, and that in itself reflects the mindset. And ISIS have created this through their propaganda because they've put everything into what I call a messianic context. They're saying this is the end of times. We're living in the end of times, and everything is happening now. Okay, whereby all the signs of the last day are coming. They've used the prophecy of Dabiq, and they've hijacked again all of these symbolism around Dajjal, and about the Dajjal system, and about Mahdi, and about Isa, the return of the Prophet Jesus alayhi salam. They've hijacked all these ideas, and they've made it people think it is imminent and happening now.
If you were to speak to somebody from ISIS and they were trying to convince you to go along with them, how would you convince them?
we'll try giving them our point of view in it and say to them like, well, this is what we believe in, and that's just not acceptable. Depending on how you've been taught as well, how you've been brought up. If you've been brought up like with the proper Islamic culture and you've like been taught really well by mosque and stuff, then you're not easily as yeah, exactly. But as for some like those girls, they've probably not been brought up proper Islamically, right way, or they haven't been taught enough about Islam, and so they might have got brainwashed easily.
If you ask the same question to a bunch of other people, I'm sure they'd have different views. Some would say that they were bribed into going there. Some would say that you know, they were probably brought up that way to think that it was acceptable to do that, and some would say that, oh, maybe they just, you know, they just went for the sake of going. I mean, we can't make that decision for them.
Being a young person, and when you see things in the news, such as what's happening in Syria and people wanting the young girls and guys going to like different foreign countries to kind of participate in that kind of activity that is not Islamic, people just feel like it is because of the open expression or the way that they look. But I think a lot of young people think it's sort of being romanticised. It's something that we've talked about in discussions in the last few weeks, that the sort of idea of going away to a foreign land and sort of living in another identity is the one that you're in now is appealing to them. But I don't think that is anything to do with Islam or the way how connected they are to their faith. It's just sort of an escapism, I think.
It's not something you can draw a parallel to, you know, to all young Muslims are feeling like this, and this is the reason why people are going abroad. You know, these are isolated instances that people have their own opinions, you know, and their own personal motives, and education could definitely tackle those motives.
Shamima, the 15-year-old girl from East London, if you see who she was following on Twitter, she was following around 70 ISIS extremists, listening to their worldview, genuinely believing that what they're saying is true Islam. And so there's a deliberate recruitment of young women and girls, and some of that is ideologically where these girls are being groomed, but also there's a form of sexual grooming taking place as well, where what you're seeing is young girls are speaking to these older jihadi men. These jihadi men are making conversations with them online, saying, oh, I love you, come over and marry me. And there's a lot of that going on as well that a lot of parents may not be aware of. So I would say there's a form of ideological grooming, but also sexual grooming that ISIS and other extremists are using to target vulnerable young girls and teenagers.
It's very important we don't try to generalize why young British Muslims are going to Syria or Iraq or joining ISIS. This area is actually quite complicated. If you look, many people actually left this country on aid convoys. So the first response was a humanitarian one. The second response was also humanitarian in the sense that the British government was supporting the rebellion against Assad. So British Muslims felt, you know, they can go and join the Free Syrian Army, etc. But of course, there are elements there that are very far from Islam, that are very far understanding of Islam, and it is a problem. And interestingly, even now, there was a story this morning about there's about 50 to 100 British youngsters in Turkey that have left ISIS because they realized that it was not anything to do with the religion.
या रसूल की आवाज आए लब्बैक लब्बैक या रसूल लब्बैक लब्बैक
But what we've noticed is that on the far right, people are actually trying to bring themselves up as not racist, to say that the problem is not Asians, the problem is not foreigners, but really the problem is Muslims. And so this is something that we see with a new far right group called Britain First. And what Britain First did during when the Rotherham scandal broke was that they very importantly said that the people behind the child sexual exploitation in Rotherham were actually, they were very careful to say they're not Asians, but rather they're Muslims.
They had some leaflets in their hands and they said to him, you people are grooming, you Muslims are grooming girls, and here's the leaflets about it, and you should stop grooming girls. And then he began to say something along the lines of, here's the Bible, you should read the Bible, and you should study the Bible. And it wasn't the things they were saying, there was nothing wrong with that, We don't have any problem with people coming inside the masjid. We don't have any problems with anybody saying, can you read the Bible? We don't have any problems with anybody saying that there's problems in the society. It was the aggressive manner they came forward with and the tense situation they created and the atmosphere of 10 people coming and having this SAS style of actually trying to invade the masjid.
Apparently it was about 10 of them. They were quite shocked at this incident, but it wasn't just confined to my house. They did visit the mosques, various masajids in the Bradford area, and what they posted on the internet, their behavior was quite aggressive. When you go into them, you try to have a dialogue with people. You don't interact in the way they were doing it. My message to the community was, as a result of that, because I had a number of calls and a number of messages, that you need to treat those people with the contempt that they deserve.
Police! Police! Come on, let's fucking bag him! You fucking bag him!
That stereotypes and expressions of prejudice against people of various faiths is on the increase. There's been a very sharp increase in incidents of anti-Semitic violence and acts of hatred over the last few months, and there's been a very discernible rise in Islamophobia.
Islamophobia first came up as a major topic of conversation in 1997 when the Runnymede report was published, which was called Islamophobia, a Challenge for Us All. But what we've seen in the last few years, since 9/11, since 7/7, and on today, we see that anti-Muslim hate crime is actually increasing and is becoming more of a concern. There are a number of ways in which I would say that Islamophobia is a really serious problem. The first is that people who display kind of an expression of being Muslim, perhaps wearing Islamic clothing, such as a hijab or a niqab, they get subjected to abuse simply from people who have far-right or anti-Muslim sympathies. They get subjected to verbal abuse on the street, in the public, as well as online. So online hate is actually another problem that we've looked into.
Clearly, we had a conference here on Islamophobia last week, and one of the presentations alluded to reporting within certain mainstream periodicals such as the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, and indeed even some of the mainstream TV channels. That very clearly shows, and this is factual, the very heavily biased ratio of negative Muslim stories as opposed to positive ones. I can't remember the exact ratio. And I think while that's there, it's an uphill struggle. It's like pushing water uphill, because every time you push a little bit uphill, this torrent, comes down the other way.
I am sure that you're here, that you agree the EDL is not welcome in Bradford. Their views are not the representation of the British people, and the British press has got the duty to make sure they're exposed and their hard line against Muslim community and Islam is exposed.
The way that the media actually certain media portrays Muslims is very biased, is very negative, and it's almost like, the Muslims are kind of taking over.
One of the comments that one of the Ofsted inspectors made in the Birmingham schools was there seemed to be an awful lot of bearded men. What's the inference to that? Bearded men, so what does that mean? Is it because they've got a beard that they're so-called terrorists?
The word terrorist is a good example, because it is a highly charged word, which is newsy, and it is strong, and it is harsh, and it creates interest. So terrorist, does that mean a threat to me? Who are these terrorists? Oh well, they're suspected terrorists, or you say the police go on a terrorist the terrorist branch of the police go on a raid, and the implication is the people that they're questioning are themselves terrorists.
The media has changed a lot, I think, since 9/11. I think that initially after 7/7 and 9/11, the media often were producing headlines which were hostile, and that still exists today. But I actually feel there's been a shift where now there are large sections of the British media which are giving Muslims a greater voice, are looking for greater diverse views. They're not just going to the usual community leaders, they're getting diverse views from women, from young people, and I think that's really important. And
the national newspapers are very often controlled by political forces who have vested interests. And so, having worked on national newspapers, I know that it is always attractive to journalists to be able to present things in terms of conflict, controversy, anger, resentment. Those are hard things which are sort of stimulating to people's, it draws people's attention to it.
I do blame Muslims out there who then, through their actions, cause these stereotypes, because some people act in this place. Through their actions, they cause these particular views to become established in society. And I also blame another group of people, the group of people like ourselves, who have the ability to change people's hearts and minds, to re-educate people, to give people the correct understanding, yet we do nothing. We think, and this is it, and I have to be critical of our community here in Dewsbury. We've had 2 of our youth go over to Syria, allegedly go to join ISIS, 2 of them.
They've described Tala Asmal as caring and kind, but it's now believed the teenager has become Britain's youngest ever suicide bomber.
As a neighbour, I'd see him on a regular basis, walking in and out from home, up and down the street, we'd walk past each other, several times in a day sometimes. And like I keep saying, he was just an average teenage boy. There were no signs, there was nothing to suggest that there was something going on in his mind, or something terrible was going to happen.
Really, to show the true essence of Islam is something that we failed miserably to do. I have to say that people may disagree, but I just think if we subscribe to this theory of the Quran and the Sunnah and genuinely say our desire is to follow in the footsteps of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and we look at the actions that he undertook in communities where it wasn't Muslims residing solely, particularly in Medina, and his interactions with the Jewish and Christian community at the time, I think if we could replicate a fraction of that, we would go such a long way towards being able to address some of this.
I personally think that, in addition to all the obvious things about people needing to respect how they talk about individuals and don't brand people in a sort of broad brush and indiscriminate way, I think the most powerful thing in Britain would be the kind of thing that you heard in the newspapers this morning, is when leaders of the British Muslim communities themselves get up and say that, what people are doing is not in the name of my religion. The most powerful message.
الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على من بعث بالسيف رحمة للعالمين.
When you kill someone, this is you're taking a life of someone. This is not something to celebrate. Again, we go back to the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Is this what they did? They recited Quran when no, of course this is not from the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So everything about ISIS, this is a psychotic organization.
It's not easy taking someone's life, and sometimes just to prove a point, to please your master, saying I've got courage, you're taking someone's life. What kind of attitude, what kind of attitude you're portraying, and also the damage that you're doing to Islam. Because if you're doing it in the name of Islam, that's a complete disservice to Islam. So as a result, here in Leeds Makkah Mosque, we want to disassociate from any hate preacher that may be radicalizing people and motivating people to go to Syria to take part in a civil war. And we also utterly, unreservedly, unequivocally condemn any person who's encouraging others to go part and take part in a fight in Syria.
Because at mosque level and community level,
ourselves, we are sometimes not sure how to integrate between Muslims and non-Muslims. And that's the key point that we have to remember. So our young people aren't sure how to be a part of the society and what the relationship should be between them and non-Muslims. So they have, of course, then lots of different messages coming through.
It's very interesting how third-generation Muslims, a lot of them have become a lot more religiously inclined. But the real question here is, well, what kind of Islam are they following? It's not, it's a very narrow, I would argue it's a Wahhabi-orientated kind of Islam, very binary, very intolerant, that has no respect for culture, and is very intolerant. And I think that's the key issue here. And how many of these young people, they disregard their Pakistani culture, they disregard their Somali culture, when in fact Islam's always embraced culture. But what we're living in today is that there are ideologies of Islam which totally disregard culture, and I think that's incredibly problematic.
Most people don't even listen to the young people, they just say you're expected to behave in this way. Now if you don't engage young people in discussion, they go underground. And that's where they go into the online space, in a secretive way. And this creates vulnerability. This is, you could say, a type of grooming process where individuals online are going to be targeted and they're going to be, like I said, influenced. And then if they're not going to go to anyone else and talk about it, because they say don't go to anyone else, then that becomes the only source of information they have. We need to provide counter-narrative to challenge these ideas. Imams need to do this, faith leaders, counselors, youth workers, many people, they need to do this.
I think it's very difficult to just say that you can have one prescriptive approach to stop people from radicalization. Young people get the information from various places. And internet is one place that is very hard to control. So what we have to do is start at the beginning. The beginning is in our parenting, for example. How we bring our children up is very important. When we send our children to masajid for Islamic education, it's very important what is the syllabus that is there. In that syllabus, is there elements of citizenship? Is there elements of responsibility? Is there elements of balance, like the deen is? Our religion is of balance. Are those elements built into that curriculum? Also when they're going to school and everything else. So it's not a problem of just one organization or one community. This is a problem of society. All of us have our responsibility.
It is manifest in what Allah said in the Quran, where He said, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, walan tarda anka al-yahudu walan nasara hatta tattabi' millatahum." That the Jews and Christians will never be happy with you until they take you away from your own deen and you start to follow them.
Real examples of women who have challenged imams, for example, who have been saying things like, oh, it's you must go and do jihad in other countries, or imams who've been preaching hatred about Jews or other faith minorities. And we know of stories where women have come together and they've challenged imams, they've challenged madrasas, they've challenged extremist preachers who are trying to recruit their children, and they've done that successfully. So what we're saying to women is, if women are doing it in other parts of the UK, we need to replicate those examples of good practice and show how women can be that first line of defence.
The 7-7 lads, they lived in Beeston, and when they carried the bombing, I was a member of the masjid at that time, and I'd never seen them in masjid, never seen them come to mosque to pray. We do not know where they learned their activities, but when 7/7 happened, mosques were blamed for the young kids' activities.
Mosques are getting a lot better. I mean, I've been Muslim for 22 years now, and I remember mosques 22 years ago were very different places to what they are now. They were very male-dominated, quite cultural, and a lot of the messages that were coming through that to the youth in particular were very negative. Mosques are realising that this isn't the way to go, and this certainly isn't a part of how the Prophet, peace be upon him, taught about Islam and integrated young people.
Many mosques don't allow women to come in. We know that there is misogyny within Muslim communities, so it becomes normalised. When we have Muslim preachers or imams saying, yes, the role of women is within the home, and then ISIS is saying that as well, it's not a big gap, it's not a big jump from this to that message, because in one sense we've normalised gender equality. And so that's why my organisation, as well as countering extremism, we think it's fundamental to tackle the issue of gender discrimination, misogyny within Muslim communities, because for us, we feel the two are related, and we can understand and see why young women and girls buy into that very skewed vision of what they perceive to be women's empowerment and liberation.
If you're following Islam, then then you have to have that understanding. You haven't got a choice. Otherwise, you've left Islam and you've been caught up in some sort of tribalism. And hey, there are mosques like that are quite tribal and narrow. And there are churches like that. But that doesn't mean that Christianity is fundamentally of that. Or it doesn't mean that Islam is fundamentally, in its essence, about that. We have to learn to be clear about these things.
I think it's generations and generations of misunderstanding about the messages of Islam. I think in a lot of our communities, culture sometimes tends to take over the Islamic teachings and the teachings about the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And then young people are almost forced into choosing between their maybe Asian or Arab or whatever culture and being British. I mean, if you've been born and brought up in England or or Scotland or somewhere that's not from maybe where your parents or grandparents were from, and then you're almost being forced into this mould of choosing between, say, being Pakistani or being British, etc., then that poses a problem. And because sometimes we don't see the difference between the culture and Islam because of maybe past experiences or learning in the masjid, etc., then young people feel that they have to choose.
Pursuing the prevent strategy is something which has become obliged upon schools, upon nurseries, upon general practitioners, in fact in every sphere of society in Britain today. And this is a very dangerous development. What in fact they want to say is that you cannot bring up your children according to Islam.
I think the prevent strategy has a number of holes that I think that the government needs to address. Primarily is that they need to be taking a harder stance on the far right. In 2011, when they reviewed the counterterrorism strategy, there was some discussion of the far right. But I think that the way that the prevent strategy has been applied since its inception is that Muslims have been kind of put under its umbrella more than far right groups. So I think that the government needs to really take far right hate seriously. If we look at the numbers, there's a large number of anti-Muslim attacks that end in murder, right? And that means that there's serious forms of hate and terrorism that need to be prevented that are coming from other sources.
But what I've noticed, having done this work for a good number of years in the UK, is that there are a lot of active lies being pushed by certain Muslim organisations in this country to try and suggest that prevent is about prevent is about spying. And it's factually just not true. It is actually a lie. And I think some of that is to try to discredit what prevent is about, because what a lot of these Muslim organisations do is they will try and say prevent is about spying, but then they don't actually offer anything in terms of this real problem that we have in this country of young Muslims being committed to acts of extremism. They provide no strategy for that. I mean, my frustration has been, where is the Muslim leaders in this country, all the Muslim mainstream organisations, where is their prevent, countering extremism strategy? Where is their grassroots initiative? I don't see it. And I think this is an issue that as Muslims in this country, we have to deal with. We can't bury our heads in the sand. We have a problem in this country. And if we don't do anything about it, our children, it will be our children who will be drawn to extremism, and we as families will pay the price for it.
Whether a government comes up with an idea of banning preachers or banning this, I don't think it's going to work really, because it won't reach the kind of audience we need to reach. And one example is very good. Since 7/7, that atrocities of 7/7 took place, if you look at how the government has dealt with the issues, it has marginalized the Muslim community to the point now where Muslims, they don't feel free to discuss and debate issues. And this is very important, and a very important part of democracy is that every citizen has the ability, has the right, and has the confidence to speak freely and debate and discuss things.
The Home Office and the Secret Intelligence Services have not done enough to stop people going. But you see, I want to see the Danish or the Scandinavian system, because they have citizens that have gone over to Syria and helped ISIL or ISIS or Islamic State. And when they come back, they don't jail them or criminalise them. They try and re-educate them. And I think that's far more constructive to say, okay, why did you go? Why do you want to come back and kill our citizens? What is it about this creed or this violence that attracts you? Let's educate it out of you. Let's persuade you that you're wrong.
we are so insular in our Muslim societies and our Muslim communities. You know, we all live in the same area, we know our neighbours, our next door neighbours, but they're all from the same culture, from the same background. And sometimes when there are non-Muslims in that community, they can actually almost feel quite isolated at times because of the Muslims. So we need to make sure as well that we're getting out into non-Muslim community, you know, organise coffee morning for, you know, Macmillan Cancer or what have you, and invite people from the local church, from the local non-Muslim community association, get to know each other and make sure that we are integrating our children in that and encouraging our children, not sort of labelling everybody who's not Muslim as somebody who's negative and somebody who shouldn't be mixed with, etc. We need to make sure that we are preaching to our children, just like the Prophet, peace be upon him, preached to us, that we should mix and integrate and be part of our society that we're living in.
I'm going to follow what my mother has taught me through Islam, rather than thinking, oh, these girls have gone to Syria, so I'm going to follow their example because they're Muslims now. I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to let other people make me feel like I need to do that because I'm also Muslim.
You can be British and Muslim. Don't listen to extremists who say you can't be British and Muslim. And you know, not only just a lot of Islamist extremists that say that, but also far-right extremists say that as well. They say, no, Muslims can't be British in this country. So they have a common narrative.
The solution is getting everybody around the table, young, old, male, female, and speaking to and engaging with people in the community, all levels of the community, from schools to community groups, from mosques to churches. We need to have an open conversation with everybody, and we need everybody to engage. It's our responsibility as a community to now come forward and talk about these issues, but deal with them in a positive way going forward. We do not want another Talha Aslam.
We love Britain, we love being a Muslim, we love being British, we love our culture here, and the privileges and the things that we've received in this country, we should be ever grateful for. And we're part of society, and I truly believe, Britain's within us. We are British.
For me, I think it's such a great complementary fit to be a British person and a Muslim by faith. And I think if we can try and get that message across to young Muslims, that's a very powerful way of challenging the extremist narrative.
Extreme right-wingers marched to the mosque, and the press were there because there was a good chance there was going to be violence. And the doors of the mosque opened, and some Muslim people came out with trays of cups of tea and said to the BNP lot, or whoever it was, would you like a cup of tea? And that was absolutely perfect, magical, because there was all this potential aggression coming towards them, and they responded with generosity and hospitality, and with something which is quintessentially English in the English view. And I laughed my socks off when I heard that, because I thought, what a great way to respond to threat.
When we look at this matter of ISIS on a global level, we go to scholars, whether they're in Bangladesh, whether they're in Saudi Arabia, whether they're in Morocco, wherever they are, on a global level, whatever their denomination are, okay, whether they are, Deobandi, Brelvi, Salafi, Sunni, whatever they are, we find that there is an ijma', a consensus of people who have knowledge of this matter, that there is no legitimacy to this khilafah. This is the ijma'.